Biofuels are fuels that are made from biological material, and the premise behind this, why it's so critical to the development of sustainability, is that these biological materials have already been generated and they've brought carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the biological material. It's not virgin carbon dioxide that's been produced from oil that will remain under the ground unless we dig it up. So it gives us the opportunity to recycle carbon dioxide if you make the biofuels efficiently and sustainably. For me, one of the parameters that made the Biofuel Research Centre successful, and why Celtic Renewables now as a company has achieved awards and public attention and endorsement from the sector, is the fact that we've communicated the message. And that's very important to me, to go out there and speak to other people and learn from other people. And the work that's going on in research institutes around the world can help inform the debate, and it's important for me to learn from institutes. So to come here to UCD, to the Earth Institute, and to meet with the staff and learn the work that's going on here, and in turn to present through the public lecture series what I have done, will help me to go forward, and I'm very happy and proud to have been given this opportunity. It comes as a surprise to most people to learn that the original transportation fuels were in fact biofuel, and that oil was a late intervention in the fuel mix. The diesel engine, when it was developed by Rudolf Diesel, ran on peanut oil in the 1800s, and the first petrol engine as we know it was in fact an ethanol engine. The first mass-produced cars in the world were produced by Henry Ford, who developed the mass production system, which didn't exist until he developed this mainly for car manufacture, and that opened up a whole new industry which made the car affordable to the general public for the very first time. And again, these were bioethanol cars. So biofuel is not a new invention that was suddenly adapted to combat climate change. These were the original biofuels, and had it not been for prohibition in America, we may have had a very, very, very different energy mix in the world. The automobile industry developed in conjunction with the oil industry, and many people seem to think that oil's been with us forever. It hasn't. We've really become very dependent on oil in less than 100 years, but that dependence is almost entirely dominant at the moment. And the oil crisis of the 70s changed a lot of this, because people realised that we were so dependent upon oil. And many countries around the world looked to see could they gain energy independence by creating their own fuel sources. And some of the countries stuck to this, and unfortunately not all of them did. In Brazil in particular in the 70s, they developed a national state-sponsored biofuel program, and they kind of pioneered the development of biofuel, which has now been adopted again in the light of energy security, climate change, and the need to find alternative fuels. And people are looking all around the world to bring sustainable biofuels back into the market. Biofuels have been adopted all around the world. In some countries they are more dominant than others. In Brazil, for example, over half of their entire fuel is biofuel. But here in Europe we're mandated to do it. 10% of all fuel sold in Europe by 2020 must be biofuel. Regardless of how much fuel we consume or what other interventions come in, 10% of it must be biofuel, and each individual member state is mandated to hit this target. So it's critical that we develop it. It's also, in my point of view, critical that we develop it in a sustainable way, whereby this is something we can bring forward that adds benefit to the environment, to society, and to enterprise and economy across Europe. Biofuels is one of these topics where, when it first came to public attention, I think it was completely overhyped, and people saw it as a single solution to solving the world's energy needs and oil crisis. Then you get a backlash against it, and likewise that's overhyped. In the middle, along with just about any other industry you can think of in the world, there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. So biofuel can and is being made very, very sustainably. What I fear is that it still gets tarnished with this brush of, some are perceived as being a bad thing. You can paint that picture for just about any industry in the world. There's a right way to make things and there's a wrong way to make things. But biofuels can be made very sustainably, and they can provide us with independence in oil. Only a few countries in the world actually make oil and have it as a reserve. You have the potential in any country to make your own biofuel. You have the potential to do it sustainably. You have the potential to reduce your carbon emissions, to create an economy, and to become energy independent. So for me, sustainable biofuels are definitely part of the energy mix, not the entire answer. We'll never substitute oil with a like-for-like substitution. We need to look at a wide array of different energy interventions, and biofuels for sure right now is one of the things that we can bring in today. As a microbiologist with an industrial background, I used to work in a large Danish biotech company. I understood state-of-the-art fermentation. And when I went back into academia, I was very interested in looking at a defunct fermentation process known as the ABE fermentation. And at its peak, this was the second biggest biological fermentation process in the world. It died out because it couldn't compete with the petrochemical industry as a source of chemicals, particularly acetone and butanol. But a few years ago, butanol was identified as a like-for-like substitute for petrol. You can bring it in without modifying engines, without modifying the distribution network. It will burn with almost the same energy efficiency. And we know historically, for a fact, we can make this biologically at scale. So for me, working in that area, as one of the relatively few people in the world working in areas that are difficult to fund at that time, it seemed a really, really obvious thing to do, to look for a new sustainable resource of biological material that I could adapt for this old fermentation process. I'd love to say I had a fantastic eureka moment and went, aha, it's whiskey. But no, it was simply a matter of looking at where's the biggest resource of biological material in the country. And in Scotland, it comes from its huge, iconic whiskey industry. I established the Biofuel Research Centre in 2007 because I felt that the market for biofuel, in terms of public perception as well as the commercial market and the research that would help to underpin this, was working in isolated silos. And if you really wanted to bring this to fruition in a sustainable way, those independent stakeholders all needed to work together towards the same ultimate goal and ambition. And I thought that the Biofuel Research Centre could provide a neutral entity which would allow this to happen, and I could try and focus the national research towards the needs of the industry, try and get the policy in line with what the industry needs, and get the industry to come in on government targets. And that's what the centre was set up to do, to bring business, research and communication all together in one area. Not for me to do it individually by myself, but to provide a facilitative entity that would allow all of these to work together. And with the strong backing of the Scottish Government and its business agency, Scottish Enterprise and Scottish Development International, we've been successful in doing that. And Scotland now has a very focused, targeted biofuel development process, and it's helping to grow the economy, with large companies like Argent Energy now becoming multinational, and a sustainable biofuel hitting government targets. So that was the role of the Biofuel Research Centre in bringing all of these together. I think the significance of biofuels is not to look too far into the future. I think we need to look here and now. Every day that we fail to displace oil, we're simply pumping new carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And oil will run out. It's as simple as that. You can argue about climate change, you can argue about energy security, you can't really argue about the fact that oil is a finite resource. So we need to find a solution today. And though I'm sure biofuel will continue to play a role for a long time to come, I don't see the car going off the road in the near future. So if you can't take the car off the road, take the fuel out of the car and put something more sustainable in. But for me, it's not a future, it's a here and now. So I look very much at the current needs and what we can currently achieve in displacing oil from cars and from aviation. A lot of biofuels are very, very useful in terms of providing base units for aviation fuel and marine fuel and heating fuel. Anything you can pretty much use oil for as an energy resource, biofuel can substitute for it. People have heard the story of the whiskey biofuel, and it's captured imagination, and it's quite interesting, but underpinning all of this was fundamental research. It started a test tube in the lab and a simple bit of work to see, will this work, out of curiosity. And out of scientific interest and curiosity has come all of this. But make no mistake at all about it, the origins of this go back to very, very simple basic science. The difference is having the interest and the ability to take it beyond the lab and into the open market. And that's another skill that I think students and researchers should bring into their portfolio of activities. Science in isolation, I don't think, can help people. Science in implementation can. For me, the significance of what we developed in the Biofuel Research Centre and we're commercialising as Celtic Renewables, lies in the fact that we're adapting a known and trusted process. I don't need to convince people that the ABE fermentation will work per se. We already know for sure, at scale, this was one of the biggest industries that the world has seen. What I need to convince people of is we can adapt it to new, novel, sustainable substrates. And in tapping into the byproducts of the whisky industry, we've been able to demonstrate that this is a real viable proposition. What I want to do is bring it to the market, which will allow the whisky industry to grow, not just in Scotland, but the Irish whisky industry, India, Japan, Canada, all over the world, and other related drinks industries. So in terms of its potential to provide sustainability to existing large industries, I think that's very significant. To contribute towards biofuel and reducing carbon emissions with a sustainable way of producing biofuel, I think that's very significant. But I think the other thing that strikes me is that the story viraled. People all over the world have heard about this and are interested in it. And I think that's a very powerful message as well, that people can look at sustainability in biofuel and have a global viral story that's positive about introducing innovation into this area, rather than what can often happen is that media prefer negative stories in all walks of life. The sensational stories always work a little bit better to sell newspapers. But this has captured the imagination, and I think that's significant as well as everything else in terms of genuinely producing a sustainable biofuel and growing the economy and creating jobs and adding sustainability to the industry. I think as an exemplar of what can be achieved, I'm quite proud of that achievement as well.